Okay, so we've had a number of, as I said, the different levers that had to be made up. What I did is I made masters for ones that I needed multiple pieces of because it makes it a lot easier, obviously, not to have to make every single part from scratch over and over and over again, particularly if you need 8, 10, 20, 30, of a particular piece. So I had to make clevises that were the right size. I had to make the other levers that hang down, and some things I'm going to have to make from scratch because it just didn't pay to do a master and do molds and castings and send them out. But we've got in here, actually, if you look at the photos here, as I talk about some of the parts that hang down, we've got some of the levers. I've had to have these made. These are sort of a T-shape at the bottom, and they have the clevises and the hard lines attached. And then if we go over to another photo, you see them from another angle. And if we go underneath the vehicle, you'll see, I'm just trying to think, I don't have the shots in here that show you that, but anyway, I'll point over here. These parts are going to mount somewhere around here, and then they go back to levers that are hanging down that are already on the brakes, which, as I showed before, so right there. These are going to get painted before they get firmly set in place, but right now everything's getting set for cleaning, test fit, and so that all the parts can be made and that they'll all fit and then they'll all go together. So what I've had to do with the molds and castings, as I was talking about, is, for instance, clevis. Here's a raw casting as it would have come into me. You see that there's a lot of flash and all on there. Some of them had more flash than others. And I take those parts and then eventually clean them up, sand, open up, and then they get drilled out. So we've got a little teeny hole that's drilled through there. We've got the opening, and we've got another hole on the back side where my thumb is pointing to, and those in turn eventually they get mounted on what I was calling the T-shaped parts. And here's a T-shaped part that's been drilled out and cleaned up on both sides, and then that goes into, for instance, I have for the right side here, I've got one of those, and then I've got the little clevises that are on there, and they are tacked in with little pins, and they're hinged right now. Eventually those will be glued in place, probably at an angle, something will hang down, but I need to have them movable so that once I can get everything set with the fitting and all the other parts that they have to line up to. So I know it's a little complicated, but that's how it goes. The next thing we're going to show is parts in place and sort of how it's supposed to work. So I'm going to show you the install of two other components that are in there. Let's see, I'm trying to think of which one I'm going to put in first. This is one of the big cross members, and if we go back to the photos for a moment, it's not a great shot of it. I have better shots, but you see this bar with the hump that goes across. It's a pretty big heavy bar. Off of here you see right where my finger is pointing, that's actually one of the hangers for the battery box, battery box, which will go in at a later point. So it all has to get thought about as to what's going in, when and where, and it's sometimes it's really a pain. So first we're going to put this in. Eventually this will be set in place firmly, but we're putting that in, and that goes in like that. And see, it's set in place, and I'll be able to adjust it. Right now it's up to about where it needs to be. And then there's another bar, another member that goes in, because these are going to have parts hanging off of them. For instance, this bar, which is just raw right now, is having other parts that I'm making in the that I'm making as part of the all of this has to go and mount to this narrow bar that I'm doing. So these parts, these I'm making from scratch. I have a couple things that are semi pre-made, and they get fitted in. Once those are set and fitted and painted, then I can put this bar in more permanently. Right now there are a couple of areas I've engraved an L and an R, so I know which side is which because it is somewhat specific. Put it in at a little bit of an angle, and it will clip into place soon. There we go. Okay, that's in place. Flip that up again, and then we do that. Now, for test fitting, there's a little bit more involved. We use this tape, which is great because it doesn't really mar anything up. It's a masking tape, actually made by Tamiya. And then we're going to take with these. I've had to mark left and right because they are specific at this point. So this bar, this is going to go through one of the mounts that I have on there, and then other parts, so we go put that in there just a little bit. And then I'm going to move the lamp so I can see what I'm doing, or try to see what I'm doing. And then these are going in. Now these T-shaped parts, they have to have the flathead of these rivets have to be on the inside to meet each other. So those were actually filed down. So I'm going to put, this goes in, oops, one of these goes in like this. It's a little tough, so and push the bar through a little bit so I can see it on the other end. Oops, that isn't supposed to happen. So much for best laid plans. Alright, we're going to go again. Get that in there. Okay. And that's one of the problems with these little parts, is it takes not much to move something out of place. Okay, and then that one up there. Okay. And they're not quite in the position that I want them in, but you get the general idea. And then what happens is there are going to be this is why I don't like filming while I'm actually making something. This is not Orange County choppers, and I don't use big hammers. So give you this for an example. This is a thin brass rod, and that's going to connect on those. They're also going to connect on there, and they're going to be the larger pieces that I'm making now hanging down from there. And it's an involved linkage. So actually it'll probably be best to show once it's in the place, but maybe you'll get a little bit of the idea. This is some of what goes into that. And so not just doing it on that side, but then of course I've got to do it on the other side, and I've got the other ones test fitted in place, and it's going to be the same thing where I've got the double arms, T-arms hanging down, and there are more of the linkage arms that hang down from here, and again putting in the hard lines, etc. And you'll see it once it's all done. And once it's all done, it will be a thing of beauty. At least I hope it will be. And the last bit is just some of the process of making the large parts. If we go back to them here, there are multiple pieces. I've got 4 going to be on one side, I've got another 3 on the other side, and then there's other individual parts that'll be bigger, and I'll also be making spacers to go in. But right now what I'm doing is I'm just making the angled arms, and there's another one hidden back there that's pushed forward that you can't see in the photo, but I can see it in some of the other shots. So what I've done is I've taken styrene, I've determined of the correct thickness to make those, and it's a rough process, and measuring out, putting a hole in the center, drilling, because that hole is going to be what we have some parts fitting in. So this is the bar that they have to mount on. So what I've done is cut them, and they're just roughed out, and then they slide over there, and then they're going to be reshaped, angled, and by the time it's done they're going to look like the part, and they get mounted on there. They get mounted on there also after they get painted. So again, it's a step by step, and to make those, so it's tedious. Measuring out, those are marks, they're holes that I've started to drill in this strip to make them. As you see, some of these pieces are already cut out, and then it's just slowly going through and using a reamer and opening up the hole, and once I get to the very end, it's still not big enough, and then I will go in with a much larger reamer, and I've also made marks on it so I know how far to go, and you do it a little bit at a time, and you test fit until you get it so that I don't want these really loose. You know, it's fine if they have a little bit of friction, or if they just slide over barely. Once they have paint on too, they'll grip a little bit more. But and then they'll be in place, they'll be adjusted, they'll be set, they'll be glued, and eventually the whole braking system at the rear, that'll be done. Then I can go on to the lines, then I can go on to completing the gas tank, rear lights, other components, and eventually finish the whole underside before I can start moving back to the engine, body, firewall, etc. We left off with showing a lot of the parts I was making for the undercarriage, and a lot of things that weren't complete. So this just kind of wraps up or pulls together a lot of what was just shown earlier on in this video. So I'll just give you a quick once around of the car. Body's only temporarily set in place. Obviously, only one of the doors I've taped in, and that was because I was sizing and fitting for making the spare tire mount. That's a whole other thing. Anyway, I'm going to lift off the body now, and slowly, carefully, because it does have locating pins. Alright, I'm going to put it down out of the way, mostly out of the way. And now you see all of what I was talking about before with all the linkages for the brakes. So there's a lot that's going on there. I mean, you've got the clevises in place, you've got everything is set, done. All the hard lines, the battery is installed over here, is in the battery box with the hangers, everything is mounted. Obviously the fuel tank is all complete, even down to the and the tail lights and number plate, things of which I mentioned earlier on. So that's all then there set in, and you can just see the end result of all the parts that I was working on and showing before. Okay, one of the things I forgot to mention is that little lines, these are the little power lines, the electric lines that are going back to, and they're wrapped, and they're set, and they're done basically as they were when I saw the car, and they go back to the taillights. This also, you can see wrapped fuel line here, so also wrapped fuel lines on the tank, and then we're going to show some on the sides. They're not everything is in yet, because they go to a certain point, and there are more wrapped fuel lines here. There's a block mounting, and then they get cord wrapped, the other ones that are going to be coming on from there. So that's yet to be installed. Those will be done also and coming from the front end. And that's mostly it. Of course, the exhaust still has to be put in, and the rest of the hanger done. And there's a rear hanger that has to be put on at the very outside, but that doesn't go on until the exhaust pipe is there, set, and everything gets fitted into place.